Okay, hi. Hello everybody. Welcome back to the next part of today's extravaganza for Click, Zooming Through the Lens of the Experience. This is the book launch part. An amazing book has arrived. I'm sure you've seen it. If you haven't, now's your chance. I'm going to pass it over to Naj to tell us more about it. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I usually give talks without notes, and I just sort of talk on and on off the top of my head, but this is very important to me, and in fact I'm quite nervous, and you're going to hear that nervousness in my voice. This is our product. Thank you for contributing to it. Thank you for sticking around all those endless Zoom calls, the frustration of the scheduling, trying to fit everything and everyone together, the many sleepless nights. Momo, where are you, Momo? Momo has been running the Zoom session, so she's hiding. I would very much like if Momo was standing here next to me as I'm about to read this book. Maybe we can give Momo a few minutes. So the contributing artists have had their copies of the book. I hope it meets your satisfaction. Of course, there are a lot of imperfections. This was our first product. None of us are professional bookmakers. We are grateful to Peter for his exacting graphic artist eyes for fixing things. Much thanks to Doug for designing the click for us. This really, he just gave a sketch, and all of us fell in love with this sketch, and we asked his permission to keep it. I'd like you to be here next to me as I'm reading this, please. I do have a little presentation because I want to sort of, as I'm mentioning each of our artists, I'd like you to see who I am talking about. January 25, 2020, Canada reports its first case of COVID. By March, the WHO gives a name to it, COVID-19 pandemic. This is when to Zoom became a verb. New modes of interaction and socializations emerged with the COVID-19 pandemic. Could these new modes of communication connect us meaningfully? Click, zooming through the lens of experience, is one example of such digital connections becoming real. This project was not planned and emerged from a different research. We had no choice but to complete a research project entirely online, but then something more than the primary goals of that project revealed themselves: our desire to talk to one another over sharing our photos. Everything about this project is digital, other than ourselves. We have been in tens of hours of e-conversations via Zoom, email, telephone, Google Documents, and Microsoft Teams. Some of us had not met in person until today. In the process of creating this book, we have been dealing with power outages, internet bandwidth limitations, time zone differences, and screen fatigue. This creation yet would not have been possible without access to affordable digital production tools. The photos and stories shared in this book convey two messages. First, that the medium is the message. The apparatus of digital photography creates its own stories. Second, that is the messengers that create the medium, this book and this gathering. I am pleased to introduce the messengers who created this book. They have generously shared their stories, zooming in on what matters through the magnifying lens of their experiences. And I'm pleased to share this sliver of their thoughts, which are expressed in the book. In Becoming, Jack Zilak talks about the transformative power of reimagining reality. Jack uses the capacity of infinite digital post-processing to give a second, third, and nth life to the quotidian observations. These transformations, Jack writes, are steps in my becoming who I am eventually going to be. In Being, Marilyn talks about capturing her loved ones in photographs. Marilyn has been a photographer for long, winning her first camera at the age of 15 in a swimsuit context. She has formally studied photography in college. The digital technology in photography and the communication have extended her passion to extend the wall of family photos through the social media. This matters for remaining connected to where one originates from. In contemplating, Jack Rebolowski, an artist who lives from professional painting, talks about capturing energy and movement, while cameras have always been a part of her professional life. The digital allows Jackie to capture more candid moments without disrupting the scene that she will later paint. I think we'd like to mute those who are on Zoom, because, yeah, okay, thank you. Jackie captures fast photos or places that are transforming rapidly in our urban setting. In growing, Peter, a graphic artist and an active painter, an alumnus of Concordia since 1981, takes us through his process of composing with camera. He tells whimsical stories about how objects organize themselves into a narrative. The medium of art making, the cell phone, allows him to see and interpret the world in a new way every day. Jack Titsworth, the nomad, shares a thin slice of a life in travel as an international development professional whose journey started in a small town in Canada and took him on a long journey through Europe, Asia, Africa, and America, and brought him back to Montreal to retire. In all those journeys, a camera has accompanied him even through hard and unsafe journeys in sub-Saharan Africa. For more than 40 years, Jack has shared these nomadic pathways with Denise, another globe-trotting international development professional who took a break from arts to build an impressive career, yet always carrying a camera to remain connected to her passion for arts. Denise photographs to capture and convey the feeling of moments. In perception, Jacqueline Vaughn, who coined the name of this project, Click, shows us the connection between the eye and the eye, made by clicking of the camera. Jacqueline takes photographs to challenge herself as an artist to replicate the reality in paintings. This is a sensory, motor, and perceptual challenge. In Searching, Sharon Gallagher talks about her artistic philosophy. My work is about honesty, not the perfection of nature. Yet she waits patiently for the perfect scene in nature to reveal itself. A mushroom after a rainstorm, or a frog emerging in lily pads, patiently and attentively from the tranquility of a canoe. In Seeing, Sheila, who is now in Alberta, and we miss her very much, Sheila McNally tells us about her two worlds, the world of words and written communication, because she is a journalist, and the world of information and communication technologies, because she needs to connect her readers across different geographies. As someone who has aphantasia, a condition that impairs visual imagination, Sheila sculptures to create 3D art objects, but also takes photos to create her visual memories. Momo and I were also invited by the rest of the team to share our stories too. Momo came from Mexico over 2 decades ago. She was a computer engineer before she became an artist to pause and heal her body. I too came from Iran nearly 3 decades ago. I too was a computer engineer before I became interested in the transformative power of art, healing the body. This modest book is grand in its aims. This is not a photo book. It is a storybook about communicating research. We have to honor and enhance the agency of the generous volunteers who help us advance science and humanities. We need to make time and space for learning more deeply than deep learning. This work is made possible by the generosity of TELUS Health and their willingness to allow us to generate knowledge as we believe it would make a difference. We'd like to thank Dr. Shannon Hebelthwaite for supporting this project. She was the PI and the leader of the TELUS study. I will never forget the statement by one of our teammates, Jack, who had to leave. The only qualification I have to be in the project is my age, 65 plus. I hope we have very well shown that age is just the number of years to be, grow, become, perceive, pause, find pathways as nomads, and most importantly, search to see. The stories in this book illustrate the internal sources of individual power drawn from creativity and curiosity. The stories in this book reflect a collective concern about the planet, peace, equity, health, and healing that are shared by the younger generations too. In putting this collection together, we wanted to create an aesthetic experience that would draw the attention of younger readers to the digital creativity of a generation that had known art making before the age of digital reproduction. We are very happy that you are here to share the joy of this achievement with us. Well, oh yes. So I managed to go through this without crying, but I have been doing that quite a few times. And at some point, I like if somebody takes a picture of all of us together. I usually do that, but today I don't have a camera, so I'm hoping that my artist friends here, they would be helping us with that. So this is our book. If anybody has comments or questions, or you like to come to this podium and say a few words, please do so. Momo, do you want to say something? I have to. Hello to the people on Zoom. Yes, hello to the people on Zoom. I don't see you. I'm quite nervous when I have to present digitally. It's easier to have group projects when you see people that you're conversing with. Sharon, thank you so much for saying a few words. Oh.
Hi, it's me again. I just wanted to say a very special thank you to all the people who helped put this book together, but the person who most inspired me was you. Please come up. Hey. Just her enthusiasm, her joie de vivre. I just find she's got amazing people and technology skills. What do they call that? The multidimensional. So I just wanted to say a special thank you. And where'd she go, Mo? Mo is hiding again. Anyway, Mo too has certainly helped me as a person, and I think I could speak for many of us, to look at how you can sell yourself or place things or do things in a better way, even to reminding us to bring cameras today, because how many photographers don't have any pictures of themselves? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so now we can sort of start relaxing and breaking out, and we're going to have a roundtable. And I'm pleased that the creators of this project and this space for us are here, and they're going to tell us a little bit about, the context of this study. So a lot of different experiments or questionnaires that you have filled, and the interviews that you've had with Berkeley, who I'm very happy that she's here. And I think many of you have known Berkeley before the rest of us. So they're going to be presenting some of that work. Karen is kindly joining us from British Columbia. So we are going to have a little panel here and do a combination of Zoom and in person as we present that work. Everything is good, clear, anything? All right. Okay then, let's start. I like to actually, maybe Karen, if you're If you're available, I can sort of beam up your presentation.
Sure. Can I share my screen and then I can control the clicker?
Probably that would be better.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Is that looking okay?
Yeah, looks good to me.
Okay. Well, it's been a real pleasure to join in, and certainly thanks for the invitation to present a little of what we do in my research group. I've really enjoyed the discussion and the presentation of the artwork, and just hearing about, you know, people's experiences and why it is that you joined the group, and maybe you were volunteered, as one gentleman said, I think, by his wife, which is very interesting. But I think that, you know, the main thing to take away from it is just I heard so much pride and meaning in how people have been discussing the work. So you'll see from my title that the kind of work that I do with my students and my collaborators is about multitasking and everyday activities. So this is going to seem maybe like maybe a jarring transition to talking about research, but I understand from Naj that that's what she wanted me to talk about. So let's get going here. So I like to start very globally, and you know, what's more global than the World Health Organization, I guess. So I think this is important. We are 2 years into the decade of healthy aging, as promoted by the WHO. And here's their definition of healthy aging. So as you can see, it really goes beyond, you know, the corporeal. Healthy aging is the process of developing and maintaining functional ability that enables well-being in older age to pursue, you know, the things that bring you joy and passion. So another, I think, handy graphic that the WHO has put out there to celebrate the decade of healthy aging is this, and I think it's a nice way to orient what kind of work we do in my research group and in the Engage Center more generally. So at the top, above the middle line, you see functional ability, and that's really what we see, what we do, meeting basic needs, thinking and learning, moving safely, enjoying social activities, contributing, you know, creative expression and production would be among those concerns. And then below the horizontal, we've got intrinsic capacity, and we've got environment. So environments really include the kind of age friendliness of one's home, one's community, and one's broader society, how much environment support the individual to engage in those meaningful activities that are deemed to be most important. And then intrinsic capacity. This includes physical movement, sensory capacities like hearing and seeing, vitality, and cognition. And my team and I are interested in understanding those intrinsic capacities that then, you know, enable functional ability as they're expressed in everyday activities. So our research focus, put briefly, is to strengthen intrinsic capacities and thereby functional ability. And, you know, you can kind of connect the dots and say thereby well-being, one hopes, through training strategies. So here I'm showing some examples. I'm not showing off photos of my own, but they're pulled from the internet. Examples of everyday activities that are important for aging in place. And importantly, each of these actions that you see involve some form of movement, some form of sensory and cognitive function. For example, planning, seeing, hearing, and so on. I classify these as multitasking activities, activities of daily living as listed on the left. Geriatricians pay attention to these sorts of things when making decisions about aging in place. So these multitasking activities, I think, are very important because we very rarely are in motion without thinking of something else, right? So we're constantly in a state of multitasking. And well, I've spent a few decades studying multitasking, and it's not quite like this setup, but what we do in the lab is not too far off. We've done studies involving obstacle clearance, as you can see over here, walking on sloped surfaces, street crossing in virtual reality. And we measure things like basic walking speed, how aligned your posture is, your muscle contractions, and of course, how well our participants manage to multitask. So performing a mental task when we're asking them to do two things at the same time. It's too much to go into detail on, but just to summarize, over these 25 years or so, we've shown in a variety of ways a few take-home messages. One is that older adults, as compared to middle-aged and younger adults, are more disrupted by doing a concurrent task. Even middle-aged adults become a bit more disrupted when doing a concurrent kind of multitasking situation. Older adapts on the positive side show adaptive changes to walking when the mental task becomes challenging. And so those adaptive tasks favor the physical. So the physical task seems to take priority. So it's quite adaptive and favors safety at a cost to the mental task. When older adults are asked to do two things at the same time. And so the way that we've interpreted these patterns is that this cognitive capacity is borrowed to, in a way, compensate and protect physical safety. So that's really quite a sensible multitasking strategy. And because cognitive capacity seems to figure so prominently, we're interested then in whether we can strengthen this cognitive capacity in order to improve multitasking and make those everyday activities less effortful. So this is, again, like a big summary slide. You can just sort of choose to look at the bolded categories, or if you're interested in the details, I invite you to look. But basically, the kind of training programs that we have experimented with in the past years can be summarized as falling into three categories. This kind of cognitive brain training that you do on a computer while you're seated strengthens cognitive capacity in various ways. We also know that exercise training, and especially aerobic exercise and resistance training, are also known to improve cognitive capacity, and especially those control functions that we use during multitasking. And then the last category, and perhaps the most fun, or at least our participants tell us, it's a lot of fun. We've also tried more dynamic approaches like cooking training, which is really a multifaceted multitasking activity, right? You're standing, switching your balance, manipulating objects, planning, organizing, monitoring, and so on. And multi-object tracking, which I'll say a bit about at the end. And then the sort of outcomes that we look at are very much to do with, kind of physical, how you walk, how you balance, how you get up from a chair, from sitting to standing. And then cognition, we look at abilities that we can measure in a continuous way. So some memory, a little bit of mental arithmetic, and very importantly, we measure how people perform these together. So that's the multitasking condition. And more recently, we started to look at brain changes by using portable brain imaging, which I'm finding quite exciting to learn about how to use and how to analyze. So one of the examples I'll give is, it's an oldie, but it's a goodie, and it's sort of a landmark study in the sense, I'm proud to say we were the first team to show that seated cognitive brain training could lead to improvements in balance. And so here we've got somebody balancing on one leg and either just doing that alone or doing that with a short memory task. And the data show quite clearly that the people who were assigned to the training program, where they were doing cognitive brain training, you can see the group that's being trained here, and it's really just on a computer keyboard. They showed a substantial improvement in how more steady, is that correct? How much steadier they became in their balancing, comparing their pre-training to the post-training scores. Whereas people who were assigned to no contact control, they came back a second time after about 3 weeks and repeated the balance testing, showed very little, if any, improvement. So that was quite exciting to us. Here's another study, and I don't know, I mean, maybe some in the audience, I heard the Perform Center mentioned by some. This is a study that took place in the Perform gym on Loyola campus. And we call it the Bikes and iPad study because we're interested in combining the brain training given on the iPad with aerobic fitness training. So you've got these recumbent cycles so that people could actually hold the iPads while they were cycling. And we were very interested in the mode of delivery here. And the iPads either were being used at the same time or one after another, the different kinds of training. And we had our physical outcome measures like standing up, how quickly can you do that, and memory and multitasking. And just very quickly, I'm going to show, because I see that my time is fleeting, is the upshot of this is that the training works. And rather than bore you with the details of this, you just need to know the complexity of the tests go from easy on the left to more challenging on the right. And the people who were assigned to do one training, like the iPad training, and then followed by the exercise training, actually seemed to improve more than those who were being trained simultaneously. So that was kind of interesting because we thought that multitasking in training might be more beneficial, but alas, the data strongly told us otherwise. So that was a takeaway. And then finally, I just want to say a little bit about some ongoing work, because I think that strengthening cognition in the age of the COVID pandemic has taken on different forms by necessity for us researchers. But, recreational activities like what we've heard about today have taken on a digital form. So we've continued with several training studies, and we've expanded our target groups to older adults who suffer from mild cognitive impairment in some experiments, and then some other studies where we're focusing on age-related hearing loss, given that both of those conditions are associated with an elevated risk of falling. So here we're interested in how we can deliver digital training formats. So whether somebody is doing exercise training and they're living independently, or they are in assisted living or long-term care, they might still be able to access, possibly with some help, some assistance or facilitation, these different types of digital training programs. So one that's ongoing is a study where we're looking at whether this cognitive brain training is beneficial for middle-aged adults. Can we look at early prevention results and also those who wear hearing aids? And this is ongoing. So we do lots of these kind of background tests, and then we put people into a at-home computerized cognitive training for 12 weeks. And they just 3 times a week, they just choose a quiet time of day and log in through the internet and do about 30 to 40 minutes of computer brain games. And then we bring everybody back at the end and rerun the tests. And so this is what the lab looks like. And we are looking at treadmill walking, we're looking at the memory testing as well, and of course the multitasking condition. And here we've added what's kind of, I call it, mobile neuroimaging. It's sort of like what MRI does, but it's got a fancy name, near infrared spectroscopy. And that allows us to simply put a wireless cap that looks like a bathing cap on people and actually measure their blood oxygenation. The last study I want to highlight, and you'll see Berkeley's smiling face here, so I'm glad she's in the audience with you in the fourth space. This is a study that's ongoing, and I think it's getting ready to launch within the next month or two. And the focus here is on comparing training while people are seated and while they are standing. And the training task is this kind of dynamic visual tracking task, or dynamic visual attention task, where you take note of some of the balls and you kind of keep track. So it's a little analogous to what you deal with when you're walking across a busy intersection and you've got, pedestrians to kind of take account of. And the nice thing that we're finding so far in preliminary results is that walking speed, comparing pre-training to post-training, seems to improve. And Berkeley has many other slides of data, but we don't have the time to show. But just to say that that is a study that Berkeley is planning to start enrolling participants in soon. So stay tuned, or maybe speak to her after this session if you're interested in participating. It is an at-home training study as well. So we're really trying to improve the accessibility of these sorts of training programs. So just to wrap up, what I wanted to show you today is something about the multitasking and the importance of multitasking for everyday activities. And we really seem to be using more cognitive capacity to manage walking and balancing as we age, but strengthening this cognitive capacity through brain training, exercise, or both does seem to lead to positive results. So making those everyday activities less effortful is really the overall goal of what we do. And these at-home programs do seem to be feasible and effective. So we'd like to, in the future, extend this kind of work to assisted living and long-term care facilities with some help with community partners. So with that, I will just thank you and show my acknowledgement slide. Thanks so much.
Hello? Oh, okay. All right.
Hi. Oh, you're back.
I think you can't see me. I can't see you. So maybe if anybody has questions, if I can ask someone to hold, to take the mic around. Adrian, can I bother you, please? Because I need to set up the next. So yeah, maybe you can ask your questions of Karen as I'm setting up the next speaker. Sorry.
Hello. I have an almost constant abstraction running around in my head. There's always music of some sort playing. I've heard somebody describe it as earworms. I don't know if that's the right phrase or not, but is there any way to control it, and if possible, to get rid of it?
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't know if I can give you an answer that's kind of based on my expertise, but somebody did once tell me that, if you try to sing or hum a different tune, that can sometimes knock the earworm tune out. So maybe you can try that. It's the bait and switch technique, but I have to say the caveat is it's not based on any kind of research expertise of mine. I get that occasionally too, and I find that once I'm distracted with something else that I can kind of dive into and give my full concentration to, then it seems to be less of a problem.
Could I suggest meditation? Because with the practice of meditation, you become aware of your thoughts and you can come back to the breath, which takes up the concentration rather than focusing on the earworm. And there are lots of apps for that, including Waking Up, which I've just started using, day 3.
I think that's a great suggestion. And I have not used a kind of meditation in our kind of training research, but I have a colleague over at University of Toronto who has done so. And the nice thing about that is, it is perhaps a very pleasant, holistic way of really practicing the focus of attention. And indeed, some of our computerized brain training tasks do just that. And so they're not presented as meditation as such, but that's really kind of the part of the brain that's being exercised in that way.
Anyone else have any questions? Perfect.
Well, I do have a suggestion for a distraction, if I may.
Go ahead.
Am I on?
Mhm.
If one could find a video of a spider building a web, that would definitely distract somebody from any unwanted thoughts.
It's very, very engaging.
Well, hi, Dr. Lee. I was wondering, do you have a cure for tinnitus?
Well, that is interesting. So we do, we're very interested in people who have mild to moderate hearing loss or are hearing aid users. We're always looking to invite people who have those sorts of conditions. Tinnitus is not something that we've really tackled so much, but from what I know, it's hard for it to go away, and there's different levels of severity, in fact. And I know that some doctors, some clinicians will actually suggest sort of meditation and attentional training. So again, that idea of, focusing your attention. If you find that your mind is wandering off to other thoughts, to kind of learn how to be aware of that and bring it back to the focus of your meditation. And that kind of strengthening seems to help. But unfortunately, I don't know of any actual remedy that fixes it completely.
You have on your cognitive exercises about cooking.
Yes.
My routine every day is the moment I get up, I have to start arranging in my mind what I'm going to have for dinner. And I spend the entire day getting to that spot where I'm ready to cook. Is that enough exercise?
Sounds like you're doing a lot of planning, which is fantastic. And yes, the cooking study was by far, I think, the most kind of true to life training study that we've done thus far. Because, our participants really met at a community kitchen, and on day 1 of each week would sit with a group of participants, go over the different recipes in the big compendium that we had, and as a group decide what they were going to tackle, and then plan. And in some cases, do the shopping with our research staff. And on day 2, that was the execution day. And after cooking the dish, there would be a nice social time where everyone in the group could chat and enjoy the dish and the fruits of their labors. So it was really quite holistic. And yeah, that is it's a great activity if you have a passion for cooking, or if you feel that you're curious about it. It's such a wonderful multitasking practice. I know, many people may have had the experience of having somebody over for a meal, and you're not quite finished with your cooking. So on the one hand, you're trying to entertain your guests and continue with their conversation, and try not to burn the thing that you're cooking. And I have to admit that sometimes I have lost track of the thing that's in the oven, out of sight, out of mind, right? Until you smell the burning. So that is a definite multitasking activity. Thank you for that.
Anyone else?
Okay, so oops. All right, that would have been a very nice scene if I sort of broke my back here. Thank you so much, Karen. If you have time at the end, maybe we can come back and ask some questions. So next, it's Professor Kim Sawchek and Constance Lafontaine, who are going to be presenting from this end of the room and give us a few minutes to do the Zoom sharing and everything. And I invite you to please introduce yourselves. I forgot to actually ask for bios of my presenters. And at this moment, I shouldn't do it off the top of my head, so.
And I just want to, I feel I actually don't need a microphone. Oh, you need it for Zoom, okay. Well, welcome all the people on Zoom. Again, congratulations to Naj and Momo for this fantastic project. And congratulations to all of you for this beautiful book that you've created, but also for the community you've created together through the work that you've done over so many weeks, and to the dedication and commitment to not only the project, but to your craft and to your art. So it's fantastic. I just want to say that I love the title. Click is like, it also is like we talk about click moments, those moments where suddenly we realize something. So click is such a suggestive word. But also I just want to mention that we work at this place called the ACT Lab that Naj has been a part of for a while and Shannon's been a part of. And one of the things that we think about that I think it is resonant with your subtitle is that for us, aging is not just, as you mentioned, a number. Aging really, for us, and we talk about this and have written about it, is a lens that allows us to see the world and experience the world in a different way, where we also bring our experience of the world to how we see and what we actually do throughout the life course and as we are all aging. So I think it's so, the words for the title are extremely resonant for me, because it's so much part of how I've come to understand my own age and aging through working with older adults for a number of years now. And so Constance Lafontaine and I are going to just talk to you a little bit about that. And we wanted to also present things that are about what we do in communication studies that are underlying some of the digital work that you've done and is part of the research trajectory of the ACT Lab. So we belong to ACT, which stands for Aging Communication Technology, and we are a multi-methodological research and creation lab, I would say, that brings together students, researchers, activists, and artists to examine the experiences of aging within a digitally networked society, and to think about that network society from the lens of aging. So what you're doing, again, for me, you've created research, not just a beautiful book. We work with different community organizations in Montreal to develop methods for co-design for the implementation and evaluation of projects with older adults. And we always emphasize the with, not for. I think it's really, for me, important to say that we don't always know what should be done. And so we need to consult from the get-go. And I think it seems to me that that's what all of you have done so admirably and with such intensity and thought, is to tell us what it is that you want to do. We like to instigate and amplify initiatives that challenge what we call the systemic exclusion of older adults from public life on the basis of a lack of digital access. But we don't always assume that digital access is the answer to everything. We think it's important to say, when is it important and when should it be done? And I heard someone today talking about painting, and I paint and take photographs too, and work between the digital and the so-called non-digital. And there's moments where the tactility of a medium is just so important and feels immediate. I love to doodle, and I can't imagine doing that on a computer in the same way that when I'm listening, my hand compulsively moves. And it's important for my own cognition. So I'm thinking a lot when I'm watching and looking at your photographs and listening to Karen as well, how much that activity is also about challenging what interests us in terms of subject matter as we age. And it allows me to think about the multiplicity of experiences you're bringing to us that need to be thought about. Finally, we do what's called participatory action research, and Shannon will talk, I think, a bit more about that as well. And I think that's also something that NASH has been instigating with this project with diverse communities of older adults that often is centered on digital learning, but also the digital arts as such a great way of learning new things, not just about how a camera works, how a computer works, different software programs, but it's a kind of way as well where everybody can share something and has some kind of knowledge that you bring with you when in the learning process. And so really we try to demystify this thing called the digital as something that's outside of our own experience. And I learned that from 2009, I've been doing interviews with older adults about the transition from landline phones to cell phones. And it was so fascinating because people were I realized some of the people I was interviewing who were in their 80s, of course, had been around when the internet was invented and had big cell phones in their cars, and had sometimes worked in those industries, and so had contributed to the creation of the current digital world that we sometimes forget or is forgotten. We think about access, and this is a very bad image from an article that I like very much called the Access Rainbow. One of the things we know in our research around digital communication, and having worked with many older adults and being older myself, is that I sometimes engage in what I think of as self-ageism, where I blame myself. I don't know how to do this because I'm getting too old to learn. Or I think of myself as being incapable. Well, one of the things we're interested in is all the kinds of steps and both barriers when we talk about access to inclusion that we need to take into account, so we just don't say, it's my fault, I made a mistake, or I can't learn this. Well, what needs to be thought about? And so Shade and Clement have this beautiful access rainbow, which actually Constance and I really don't think is way too neat a diagram. If we were going to do this, I need to draw a bowl of spaghetti with colored strands, which is more, I think, representative. But we need to think about governance, like those are the policies that are put in place that tell us where, how much things are going to cost or where we can set up a network. We have to think about literacy and social facilitation. And in fact, that's what you've been facilitating here, is access in that way. We know that digital people come together to learn digital things, but also because we want to be with each other. That we have to think about service, like what kinds of services are out there, what kind of content is there, is it appropriate? So you've been engaging in interventions in this project in many of these layers. We think about the software tools, we have to learn them, are they appropriate? We have to think about those devices and how they're structured. Is it easy to manipulate? We've done a lot of podcasting, and sometimes the old Sony things where you have to go through multiple menus and remember what was where means that you just don't even, you want to throw the thing against the wall and go never. And sometimes an old-fashioned dial is way more easier. So, that kind of design, what we call the affordances of the technology, are important to consider, as well as carriage facilities. So what are the kind of infrastructures in place? So again, if something doesn't work, it's not just you, it can go wrong at any one of these 7 levels, and that's what we think about. We're very influenced by these 2 books, one by Design Justice by Sasha Constanza-Schock, but really for me, this book, Digital Dead End, Fighting for Social Justice in the Information Age by Virginia Eubanks, is a fantastic read And it's a good book on stories collected of people who are thinking about when is it appropriate to become digital and in what context and circumstance. So I recommend those two books, and I like the cover of that one in particular. Eubanks talks about CAR, and back to participatory action research. I want to put a second C because I think creativity and collaborative action reflection research is closer to what someone like Naj does or what we hope to do as well in the projects we do. So the emphasis here is on collaboration, it's on action, and what you're doing today is reflecting and talking about what you've made. And for me, that's also creativity should be in there as well. It should be CCARR. But what Eubanks emphasizes in her work, and I think for us, this is also important, that everybody, and she doesn't deal with older adults, she deals with working class people in upstate New York, mostly as her research partners. But she talks about working class people all have vast experience with IT and come to technology and social justice programs as knowledgeable and asset-bearing rather than deficient or needy. And that is our perspective on age and aging in the digital world. I always feel that my students come in thinking, oh, we're going to teach those old people something. And at the end of something, what they also learn is, oh, there's so much to learn from the people we brought in. And so it's setting up those reciprocal relations, thinking what you bring to a table and the knowledges you have as being absolutely fundamental and important to acknowledge in a project. And I think, again, I don't want to say what you've done, but I've heard about all of you from Naj. And it seems to me that oh, she talks about you in glowing terms all the time, but that's what I was hearing. So we've done a lot of podcasting, digital storytelling, blogging, digital photography projects, things about digital image scanning, curation, music and media making. And this is just some images from projects that we've done that are, in a sense, companion projects, not the same, but companion projects to what you've done here. And we're not going to go into detail into any one of them, but just mention them. And now I turn the mic to Constance.
So as Kim mentioned, we've been working on creative projects with communities of older adults and with community organizations that work with older adults and that have social justice mandates. Some of them in particular have been centered in low-income housing in Montreal, so a lot of them in the Peter McGill area, working in particular with Groupe Harmonie in terms of creating workshops centered on digital learning, so both in the kind of sense of drop-in tech clinics, but also in terms of really creative projects centered on digital storytelling or digital photography as well, through which people learned how to share photography, for instance, with others. And so, as Kim mentioned, this is just an overview of some of the work that we've done, but through all of our work, there's a kind of common thread of critically considering not only the context of digital access, but also understanding digital access as a privilege in society that is unevenly shared among people. And so we wanted to really emphasize this today and to look at some stats around digital access. There's a lot of discourse about, oh, older adults have gotten, more and more online over the course of the pandemic, which is true, but it also hides remaining deep inequalities that exist in society. So Canadians spend an average of $233 on communication services per household a month. Yeah, so this might ring true for a lot of you here. And this is a number that's been generally on an upward trend in society, in our Canadian society. And Canada has the second highest communication cost of the industrialized world. And these costs are prohibitive for those with low income. And this comes from research that we've done, research on affordability and telecommunication services, where we asked older adults, what do you think about the cost of telecommunication? And what some people told us is that they go without food or without medicine so that they can afford their cell phone plans or internet, or conversely, people just feel completely left out of a digital world and and don't believe that they belong in that world because they don't have access to enough income. Also, our statistical research shows that older Canadians make more narrow uses of cell phones in comparisons to older adults living in many European countries. So what we did here is we did a quantitative study that was looking at the uses of digital technologies across several countries, and Canada was an outlier in how older people use their cell phones. They use fewer functionalities of their cell phones. And then when we follow this up with qualitative research and asking, how do you use your cell phone? Why do you not use it in this way, whereas we know other people do? For instance, why do you not use WhatsApp as much or download as many apps? People are afraid of the costs that are entailed by using their phone. So they're afraid of very scary bills at the end of the month and getting trapped in a system where they're not fully aware of when they're using their Wi-Fi, when they're using their data, and so on. So this is to point out that there are clear policy decisions and a clear relationship between the telecommunication oligopoly that we have in Canada and people's access to digital technologies. So in the North American context, research shows that digital use is related to factors such as income, education, and general literacy, as well as race and ethnicity. And we'll see some more specific stats in particular related to income soon. And then very importantly, use and proficiency are not the same. So when we see stats about use, it doesn't mean that the kind of use is the same across the board. We understand that there is a more advanced use of digital technologies, of cell phones, of the internet that's not just captured when we look at a lot of the data. So apologies, this is in French. This is from Net Tendance report that has come out recently in terms of updated stats pertaining to access. So again, we hear that overall the use of technologies, of knowledge of the internet, use of the internet by older adults has gone up 14 percentage points over the course of the pandemic. But what this obscures is that there are still very important divides when it comes to income. So when you're looking here, non-internautes, so the bottom line, the people who don't use the internet, who are complete non-users of the internet, we're still looking at 55% of the older population who make less than $20,000 a year. So this is still enormous. And we see, of course, a steady progression going along with income. And then again, thinking about proficiency and use as quite complex when we look at the kinds of technologies that people use. So again, this goes along with income. So technologies like smartwatches or like Fitbits are used very, very narrowly by the people who fall within the range of poverty in Canada, whereas those who have more access to income will be well-versed in the kind of range of digital technologies that are available. And so some of our kind of key lessons by working in digital literacy and digital knowledge sharing and learning within a context of low-income housing, understanding the diverse interests of older adults is key to developing materials, activities, and content that keep them wanting to learn. So we always try to understand why people want to learn to use digital technologies and engage them in that way, while being completely respectful of people's choice to not engage in digital technologies. Not everybody wants to or need to engage with the internet. Older adults bring knowledge, expertise, and experience to the learning relationship. Again, thinking of individuals as asset-bearing, of bringing something, bringing experience, bringing life experience, bringing their unique perspective on art, on photography, to learning digital technologies. And then, of course, celebrating success has always been key. We organize parties, vernissage, to a bit of what Naj is doing today, what you've all organized today. How do we put into focus the work that everyone has done?
So in conclusion, what we like to say is that access and guaranteeing access is multifaceted and related to a lot of intersecting, not just individual circumstances, but social circumstances and policy decisions made about pricing, cost, availability, design decisions made about the types of technologies you're engaging with, decisions around how to create softwares and architectures that facilitate and enable use that you encounter every day in your lives. And one of the things we were just on another study with Shannon, have done a lot of interviews with not-for-profits about this issue, and we're doing a little podcast now called Zoom Zoom. And one of the themes that has come out with that is people talking about working in community organizations about how they adapted to changes during COVID, but also some of the challenges they faced and some of their constituents face because people could not always afford Wi-Fi. And it meant that they couldn't then acquire the experience needed to acquire the digital proficiency needed, and that many of them used to do things like go to a library to get that access or to McDonald's, but suddenly during COVID, that was also cut off. So I think we, again, thinking about access in this kind of from this access rainbow position means that we think about all the ways that you actually have to have a lot of knowledge to use this thing that you start to take for granted, called a smartphone. The phone isn't smart, you are. Okay. In that, again, how does this connect to the issue of in the lens of aging? Well, this may or may not apply to you, I don't know. But what we do know that older adults living on a fixed income after retirement face particular challenges. And I'm thinking about this because I'm ready to retire, frankly. And I have a pension and a job, and I've had one full time, and I've not had to be in and out of the workforce. But if you have, and you've worked part-time, you may, after retirement, find that you are having to face some difficult choices about what you keep, what you don't keep. What we do know, and this is from Stats Canada, is the median income for older adults in Canada is $32,000 a year, which is just over what they call the LIM, the limited income measurement, which is $30,400. So that's not that much a surplus to think about after retirement. And so what I'm saying is we need to ensure affordable communication services for everybody in this country, but it becomes particularly acute as we age. And I know Jennifer Bogus, who was here a couple of years ago at Bold, just said, why don't we have Wi-Fi for free when you hit 65, just to make sure that you have access. Again, last slide. Thank you. Resources. If you want to read more, there you go. Thank you very much, Naj, and thank you all for your attentive listening, and congratulations again on your fantastic project.
Thank you. Any questions? Peter.
Naj brought this up during the project about the privilege. All the participants were privileged we had access to communication. We could afford these massive amounts that we pay Videotron or Bell or Rogers. I feel a little bit, it's displaced talking about costs of communication or access to communication, and not have somebody from Bell or Videotron or Rogers to stand up and say, oh, you're right, we spend too much money on like reinvesting profits so we can make more money, and we don't give enough to the people who don't have access or unlimited income. So I'd like to know what you think about that.
Well, what we have done is we've done submissions to Bell and Rogers and TELUS. And so although they may not be at this event, we have done we made that part of our mandate, was to do submissions when there were CRTC calls. And what we did was we did things like we brought members of our community and showed them, how when they were asked to participate in an online survey about some of this, how difficult it was to navigate the architecture of the government website. B, that already assumed you were online to make the decision. So we brought surveys to shopping malls and talked to people, gathered that data, and also wrote a submission with community members to bring, and brought them to the CRTC to do an oral and written submission that then got documented. So we have been working over the past, while we've been doing the stuff I love to do, which is the fun stuff, working with all of you, people like you, working with different community organizations. We've also said one part of what we have to do is to also bring those voices not only to our table, but if they're not going to come to our table, we're going to bring them to their table and have them here.
Isn't that the sort of the job of the person you elect to Quebec, in Quebec City or in Ottawa? Isn't that, or your local councillor? Aren't these? I mean, it's.
Yeah.
I feel I'm 68. I think, how naive are you at 68 to believe that something's going to change? And you use the word free. Forget it. People over 65 getting stuff for free. There's so many baby boomers that are retiring. They'll never give it. You're lucky if you get a 10% discount at the drugstore.
True.
And you got to show ID, you have to jump through hoops. That will never happen, but I don't think people are being held accountable.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
And I think somebody should take the microphone away.
I don't know if we're having a debate or an agreement, so. No, of course. We know that. And so, but again, that's where in communication studies, I do think that's why we talk about how personal circumstance and larger infrastructure stuff that doesn't get talked about or may not also get talked about in the media, because who owns global news? So it is, again, you feel like David and Goliath, you feel it's maybe futile, but isn't that also part of the job of the academic, is to, as C. Wright Mills said, take private troubles and turn them into public issues.
Hi. Yeah, I think that there's certainly a lot of information and technology that shouldn't be just a privilege, but more right. And speaking as someone who hard of hearing, I can say about the access communication to digital and online had been definitely a bit of a whirlwind for me. And just recently, I just got new hearing aids that suddenly they tell me I can connect to my phone, and now I'm changing volumes on my phone. And it's incredible just how far technology has gone for people who need these accommodations. But I also know being and meeting people within the disability community, so many people who need these resources and feel like they should be accessible to so many others are also part in the act of making the technology that is accessible and not so much focused on the cost that these big companies and people that say that they're trying to make accessible without really having the experience to know what it is that so many of us need. And I think there's a lot of shared issue with the senior population and the disability population, because there's many similar experiences like loss of hearing, loss of sight, mobility. I think we all can relate to many of each other's experience despite the generation. But I think with, so many younger in the new generation who are studying and in the field trying to make the technology for them and other people like them, are making technology that need to be promoted and need to be heard. And so maybe it's also not just reaching out to the big mainstream technological companies, but also looking for the more independent groups who have resources.
I'll start, and Kim's worked a lot in critical disability studies, but I think what you point out is also there have been these coalitions, right, that have been built specifically between groups that advocate for issues about age and telecommunication, and also deaf and hard of hearing groups and other kind of disability groups. And one of the key hurdles remains a policy system where there's very little competition. And so that remains a constant roadblock to any kind of lowering prices within the telecommunication. And it's not like we're going in the direction of increasing competition. There are more and more mergers. And so this remains one of the roadblocks. And so in terms of empowering the kind of small companies that would favor co-design practices, that would create systems that make telecommunication more accessible in Canada, that remains a big challenge.
Yeah, and I guess I'd also make a distinction. I think what you say is really important because, you know, the older is not other, the older is us. I've had a toe that's like been 80 years old since I was 16. And sometimes I think my attitude is like still of a 12-year-old. So what does it even mean to be 63 now? And so I think, again, when we think about age in these complicated ways, it sort of does also break down those barriers, but also what we do know from other prior work we've done, that the situation teenagers find themselves in and the situation older adults find themselves in has actually been remarkably parallel because of issues of who has agency and control in our society, who's given a voice, et cetera. So I think there's some very interesting work to follow through there, but also to make the kind of issue of aging and disability connected, but not just the same either. So again, that's the nuance that I think your comment brings to the table. And finally, why we think of things of just, you know, again, we saw this during COVID, people were handing out tablets to people in nursing homes and other places. Well, who pays for the cost of the wireless connection? Is it installed in the care home or the long-term care facility? Is that, you know, and again, some of the interviews we've done, in fact, people said in one of the interviews, it's not a luxury anymore, it's a necessity, since more and more things are online. I can't go to a hockey game. I have to download an app and go to Ticketmaster and pay another small fee, which may seem small, but all those little nickel and diming you to death till you have nothing left at the end of the month is a reality. So there's kind of things around the networking of the device that even if small companies are making apps or things that are more accessible in terms of hearing loss or eyesight issues, that the networking still remains a challenge in terms of affordability. So what's the use of an iPad or a cell phone if you can't afford the data you need because all services are streamed now? So we're undergoing a constant transition. And our job is to try and keep up. But thank you.
Hello. A number of years ago, a group of Canadian researchers based in Toronto and with half a dozen American colleagues did 5 years of research on the subject of successful societies. And it took them, according to what they said when they gave a presentation at the World Bank when we worked there, they said it took us about 3 years to agree on the single factor which one could use to describe or define successful, the most successful or the least successful society. It was life expectancy. And I suspect that from what you've said about the access to the internet and the ability to use it with your devices probably affects both life expectancy and healthy life expectancy. If you think that might be true, that might be an area for research. If there's a way of determining whether this access and the ability to use it can affect life expectancy, and then if it does, it seems to me that should be something that one could use to approach the appropriate government authorities to address the issue. It would be a complementary, a very important statistic to relate to the work you're doing, I think.
That's brilliant. Maybe just 2 points thank you for that comment. And I think in terms of thinking about life expectancy and digital access, there's a kind of question about a correlation and causation as well. And that we know that a lot of the factors that are connected to, let's say, a lack of digital access are also connected to a lower life expectancy, right? So there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation within this. And then, so I think it's something to kind of think about, but it also kind of assumes a great willingness from the governments to enable the systems to make this accessible.
Berkeley?
So recently, Naj and Kim and Shannon and I and Natalie and Karen, the whole team have been working on a scoping review that looks at, access to technology, the internet, cell phones, all that, and its associations with well-being. So things like loneliness, social isolation. And we are seeing that there are associations between these sort of devices and access to these devices with loneliness, well-being, etc. But again, we don't have the causation yet, but definitely there does seem to be more positive benefits to life when you have access to technology. And so, that is an approach that we need to get out there into the public and maybe, somehow get those lower rates for older adults, for Wi-Fi, etc., because we do know the benefits of it.
And just also, I think connected to that, there's also like thinking about, are we making the conditions that you cannot grow older without access to the internet?
Right.
Like, it's also like, what kind of systems are we setting up so that people cannot live, cannot thrive? And so I think there's a kind of social questioning about the constant digitization of everything and the forced turn toward, the digitization of services. What Kim was saying, you want to go to a hockey game, you have to go online to get your tickets and all of that. So are we creating a society where if you're not connected to the internet, you will live an unhappy, isolated life? So how can we balance those objectives?
I'll let Naj decide if we should go to the next speaker, and we could also actually just take questions and maybe not answer them.
Yeah, I think we're going to have time.
Or if there's time at the end.
Yeah, so why don't we, maybe Sharon can ask the question, and then we're going to go to the next speaker. I don't know, I thought Sharon answered. Somebody else. No, Sharon is here.
Okay.
I think an example of what we've just been talking about is I called a hotel, I won't name which one, and waited to book a room. And I waited quite a while. And during that time, they besieged me with surveys, with garbage. And it finally got to the point where I talked to a human being and I said, do you have really irritated people talking to you when you would actually answer the phone? And he says, pardon me, and then the phone disconnected. So I called again, and then I found out the rate of a room was 350 for a night. So I said, well, thanks a lot. But I have a girlfriend who has she's on assisted living, and she doesn't have a computer. And you're right, during COVID, she couldn't go to the library, so she couldn't get access to her account. And she does very well, but she is missing a lot. The quality of her life is very much diminished. She's smart, she could certainly adapt and do it. So I hope that you'll get going on the studies to see if you can hit this population, because a lot of them.
Well, I think I want to just say that at some point, if there, one of the things with the new project is we're investigating what is called data harms and the kind of different ways that privacy is breached, the kind of stories about, you know, you subscribe to something and it's impossible to unsubscribe and you're still getting charged $1.25 a month, kind of ways that the system kind of doesn't want you sometimes to, and nobody's doing it intentionally, so they say, but it becomes embedded in a system that means it's very hard to subscribe accountability, but it can have very horrible effects, I mean, on people. And that's what qualitative researchers do, is we also engage in the importance of story and not just large statistical things. So the individual story becomes very important to us, of those encounters, of what it actually means to live in a digital world, which we love, but also has these moments that sometimes mean you feel like your time is not valued, that you have all the time in the world to be online, talking to a system that then clicks off and then you have to redial and start over. So yeah, we're thinking a lot about how to fix what I think are some of the problems with it to make it a better experience, to have that relationship between life where you're not plugged in to life where you feel like you have to be plugged in, and when. And so that's, again, where the experience that we have of remembering other activities that we're not digitally connected can be important. So yeah, if well, you'll be in touch with Naj. We got to go.
No, thank you. No. We're going to have time afterward to sort of have discussion. So I think next we are bringing Aaron in. Hi, Aaron. Thanks for joining us. I think you have a little bit of a cold symptoms that are preventing you from being here. And speaking of accessibility and also the sensory, the commonality in in sort of impairments, sensory impairments, I think that's an excellent segue to what Aaron does in his research. So Aaron, I think you can share your screen with us.
Yeah, so I actually don't have any slides, which is ironic given that I'm a vision researcher. So I'm just going to talk about things today. So my name's Aaron Johnson. I'm a professor in the psychology department. I'm also a researcher at the Institut Nazareth Louis Braille and the Lethbridge Leighton Mackay Rehabilitation Center. So these are the two rehabilitation centers here in Montreal, where if you have an impairment with vision, you would go along there to have rehabilitation services. Yeah, so I apologize for not being there in person. I have a nagging cough, which I can't get rid of, and I want to keep everyone safe. So one of the joys of using Zoom is that I can still give a presentation today. So my research is interested in vision in general. In relevant for today, I'm interested in functional losses of vision with age. And you can think about this from two different points of view. You can think about this in terms of the organ, that is the eye itself. And then you could also think about this in terms of the person, what impact the functional loss of vision has on the person. So historically, how we've studied vision has been very much looking at the organs. So we can look at the organ structure. So we can take, for example, a photograph of the back of your eye. We can look at how injuries to the eye impact vision, how atrophy and sort of disorders also impact, the actual organ itself. We can also think of the organ function. So, when you go for an eye exam, what they're actually measuring is your visual function. So you will often see a series of dark letters or shapes on a white background of starting at very large at the very top of the chart and going to progressively smaller. And so what we're actually doing there is measuring your visual acuity, so your ability to see small details. So as the organ of the eye starts to atrophy and lose function, then you see less of the details. So you'll start seeing only the letters or the shapes at the top of the eye chart. You can also measure how much people see in the world around them in terms of their visual field. So For most people, you can kind of see very clearly directly in front of you. When it starts to getting sort of towards the sides of you, you see a little bit less detail, but that visual field changes with age as well, and can also change depending on what you're doing. And then, of course, the actual function itself, there can be impairment there as well. But, this is all on the organ side. And, this is where, when we're looking at medical interventions are really aiming at reducing the functional effects of changes on the organ, and are really trying to keep the organ structure intact. These things are measured, quite easily with eye exams, and this is why they're sort of traditionally used when we talk about, age-related vision loss. But the other part of this is the impact that vision loss has on the person themselves. So we can think of this in terms of skills and abilities. So their ability to read, their ability to be mobile, to be able to, I'm seeing people now walk around chairs, avoid potholes, their ability to take part in activities and participate in social events. And then there are also societal consequences as well. So employment, obviously a very important one. So for young people who lose their sight, this leads to a high rate of unemployment within those who do lose their vision. But it also impacts the quality of life. So when you start losing your vision, this is impacting your ability to socialize, to interact with the world, and therefore can lead to a decrease in the overall quality of life. And those parts are a little bit more difficult. The impact of vision loss on the person is a little bit more difficult to actually measure, but it's perhaps the most important, because what we're really interested in is, what do you use your vision for? And then can we help you retain some of that vision function so that you can keep on using those skills and abilities so you still can take part in social events. And this is what vision rehabilitation really is. So when it gets to a point where we can no longer do a medical intervention, rehabilitation is aiming to reduce the effect on skills and deficits which are caused by the loss of function of the organ. So, as a researcher who works in rehabilitation, I'm very interested in sort of looking and seeing, well, how can we assess, the impact of vision loss on people's skills and abilities. So, historically, we've only really focused on reading, and even there, it was really sort of, here's a magazine, try and read this. Then we're going to give some sort of intervention. Usually we give a device that magnifies the text to make it easier to see. And then, you can read the text, therefore we've seen an improvement. But there are many other things that could be causing changes in how you read, the type of text you're reading, the differences in the light and dark between the text itself and the background. And so some of the work we've been doing has been looking at sort of developing standardized tests which allow us to repeatedly assess reading in a controlled way, so then we can really see what impact the vision loss has on your reading. So for those of you who took part in the study, you will have read a paragraph of text as part of the study. And again, these paragraphs are designed to be very similar across different examples and allow us then to assess reading in a stable way. And then we, if we introduce an intervention and rehabilitation, we can see how much of an improvement that intervention has. So I mentioned, making text bigger. And so some of the work we've been doing has been looking at replacing some of the traditional technologies which are used in rehabilitation. So there is something called a closed circuit television, which is a big old-fashioned TV with a camera, and you would put the text underneath it, and it presents the text in a magnified level on the TV. These are incredibly bulky and are very difficult to use outside of the home environment. And so we looked at the ability of tablet devices, in particular the iPad, just using the camera on the iPad to see, can we use that to magnify the text? And do we get the same improvements that we would see with the more traditional CCTV? And the answer was yes. So what that's meant is that now, if you qualify for rehabilitation aids in Quebec, an iPad is one option that you have for being able to be used to sort of enlarge and magnify the text. So thankfully, this doesn't require any internet access. This is just using the default properties of the iPad itself. More recent work by a PhD student of mine, Elliot Morris, has been looking at, well, does the brightness of light improve reading? And so, there we used sort of the current standard device, which is this very expensive, fancy light system that costs over $1,000. And then we compared it against using the iPad, and then also a $20 smart bulb. And so these are light bulbs which you can buy at any hardware store or through an online shop, which let you vary the brightness of the bulb, but also the color of the bulb, and to see, does that improve reading as well? And the answer is yes. And so what we found is that task lighting, so having light that's bright, is really important in order to be actual reading text. So if you're reading at home and you don't have a bright light next to you, you're going to find it more difficult to read the text than if you've got a light that's next to you that's relatively bright and can help illuminate the page of the text that you're trying to read. Other work which we're doing, in fact, in collaboration with Karen Lee, who is our first panelist today, is we're looking at the impact of vision on other parts of our psychology and our body. And so we're looking at the interaction between vision and balance. So, when we're walking down the street, our balance is based off of, some of this comes from the proprioceptors in the body, which tell where our body is, where our arms and legs are, and how we're positioning our feet. But vision also plays a big role in our balance and mobility. Yet it's part that's actually not been explored much. And what we see is that in individuals who do start losing their vision, they become very quickly less confident in their ability to do tasks that require balance. So if you ask them questions such as, how easy do you find it to tie your shoelace? Those with vision loss are finding it much more difficult, not because they can't see the shoelaces, it's because their overall balance becomes poorer as they try and tie the lace. And so what we're looking at as well is to do some of the intervention strategies that we use to target vision also improve other areas of our cognition or of our balance. One that we're targeting right now in an ongoing study is looking at how stable your eye position is, because this is one that we target quite frequently in rehabilitation. So my one visual prop is I have this lovely painted porcelain eye, which was given by a colleague of mine. So normally when we're moving around, we have small eye movements that will move and scan the environment around. Something that we observe in people who are starting to lose their sight is that these eye movements become a lot more erratic and a lot larger in size. And so over the years, we've been collecting data on this. And what we find is that those who have more stable eye movements tend to report having better confidence in tasks that are involved in balance. Whereas those who have these sort of erratic eye movements, they report having less confidence in their ability to do balance. Now, thankfully, this movement of the eye is something that we can target in rehabilitation, and we have various tasks that we get our participants to take part in. We give them homework to do, so they have to go home and draw lines on certain pages and sort of identify various things, which allow us then to train them to go from being a very unstable eye position to something where they fixate much more better. And what we're finding initially is that that improvement in fixation stability is actually leading to an improvement of balance as well. So this is interesting for us because it's not only showing that this improvement in fixation stability improves vision performance, so they can read faster, they can do more tasks with quiet vision, but it's also improving other aspects of their psychology, such as their balance. So outside of this and thinking of sort of societal consequences and quality of life, other areas where we're doing work are, we worked with the developers of the Alexis Neon Mall downtown to develop the environment so it would be more accessible to those who are starting to have vision loss. And so this was working with the designers to do things such as the steps which are going down, to have them alternate between black and white so it's easier for individuals to see each step. That the signage is much larger than normal, that there are acoustic dampening panels in the mall to reduce some of the ambient noise, which can be distracting for those who are losing their hearing or their vision. And then currently we're also working with the Museum of Fine Arts here in Montreal to look at making the space more accessible there as well. So we're part of a larger research team which has been sort of looking at how older adults experience the Museum of Fine Arts. So to do this, we can use a device called an eye tracker. So it looks like a regular pair of glasses, but it allows us to track where you're looking at in the world around you. And again, this we can see based off of individuals who have normal sight versus those who are starting to lose their sight. How are they interacting? What issues are they having when they're interacting with the environment? And we're also looking at, well, can we substitute some of the experience by using audio description? So very similar to, there's this phenomenon called alt text, where images can be described verbally on an internet browser or on social media. Well, can we use audio descriptions of the art to allow those who are starting to lose their sight the ability to still go into the Museum of Fine Arts and interact and sort of have the experience of being in the art gallery. So, again, this is looking at quality of life and being for individuals to be able to socially engage in activities which they find enjoyable. So that's a kind of a brief summary of what we do. I also forgot to say that the balance stuff as well, Berkeley's in the audience, so she's a big part of this as well. So thank you so much, and I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm not sure where I should stand for you to see me, but I'm somewhere here. Does anybody have questions for Aaron? Anyone?
I'm interested in knowing what you're doing with the Museum of Fine Arts, because I know a lot of their writing is very pale.
Mm-hmm.
And it's being an Anglophone, it's also at the bottom, so it's pale and at the bottom. So if I've got hip problems and eye problems, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, so that's a good example. So we're working, so one of the wings has just been modified. And so starting last summer, we've been working within the sort of the traditional version of how the galleries are set up versus the current version, the sort of modified version. So in the modified version, there is this ability to have audio description, the labeling and of sort of the actual art pieces has been simplified and made larger. The lighting has been improved so that it's easier to actually see, especially the sculptures and paintings in the gallery. So these are all changes where, they've started this, but they also want to know, is this worthwhile doing? Because, for an art gallery to do this for all the exhibits can be quite expensive. And surprisingly, there's no work out there which looks at this sort of aspect, like how do those who are starting to have sight issues or hearing issues, or even sort of cognitive impairment, how do you interact with art galleries? And so this is part of a multinational study. So we're actually doing data collection here in Paris and in Greece to investigate this and see, well, do these changes, do they make a difference? And if they do, then that gives us evidence that then we can present to different museums around the world saying, this is how you could make your spaces more accessible to older adults, to be more inclusive. And this is really, to make it evidence-based practice rather than just someone, a sort of a designer saying, oh, this might work. It also allows us to talk to the individuals, and a big part of this is discussing, well, did you find this an improvement? Did this help? How did you experience, or how did you interact with the art, and did that change as a function of what the information and how the information is presented? So hopefully in the next couple of months, we're finishing the study by May, and then we'll be able to sort of provide the museum the results. And I can't say what those are yet, but hopefully this will provide the evidence that they need to say, do they then implement these changes everywhere in the gallery?
Thank you. Any other questions for Aaron? If not, okay, so next, thank you so much, Sharon. I think we should give you a round of applause from Thanks for being here. So next, Shannon, while we are setting the computer up, please feel free to get coffee, juice, water. If whatever is missing, we have it in the kitchen. Stretch, dance a little bit.
Oh, I'm on. It-
Okay, everyone, maybe we can get started again. So, are you well stretched, well caffeinated, sugared, energized? Hello? Woo-hoo. We are about to start again. Is there a bell I can ring? Hello, we are about to start. Take your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We are going on a journey.
Yeah.
All right, so we have been saving the best for last, and our fearless leader, Shannon, is now going to take it away. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Naj, and thanks to all of you for sticking it out till 4 o'clock today. And I was just joking, you'll see I have an interest in leisure, and all my life I grew up playing sports, and at this time of day I was always doing sports, not brain things. So you'll bear with me. We'll hang in, and this will be the last of our talk today. So my focus is a little bit in the middle. What I was realizing today that I hadn't thought of about our team before is we have some folks who focus kind of at the micro level on the individual, and Kim and Constance talked a lot about the societal level of things. And so I'm going to bring you a bit in the middle to this meso level and talk a bit about families and relationships. And in particular, in terms of my background, is in leisure studies and in family relations. So that was my PhD. So I look at kind of the intersections of these areas of families and leisure, and more recently, technology. So my work overall, I guess you could say, really has been fueled, for better or for worse, by ageism and by injustice, and by my love of older people. And so I have, over my career, a deep commitment to addressing discrimination and exclusion, calling it out, raising awareness of our biases, both conscious and unconscious, and fostering inclusion for folks. Much of my work of late has been around older folks, but I started off working in disability studies and in recreation therapy, working with people with various, that have been marginalized in lots of different ways. So as Kim a little bit alluded to, I've been certainly committed to working collaboratively in my work in research with people of all ages to help broaden their understanding, as Jacqueline noticed earlier or mentioned earlier today, to broaden their understanding about age, aging, and the social contexts that influence our experiences of getting older. I was really inspired by Jacqueline's words this morning. And so I think maybe instead of aging, maybe I will start to talk about evolving into becoming. I'm really excited for that. So just in terms of a little bit of tiny bit more background, I think this is a bit of, summarizes a little bit my approach, and also a lot of the work we do at some of the research centers and networks, and I'll talk about them in a sec. But why I became a researcher exploring this experience of age and aging was certainly partly due to the fact that aging is often portrayed as something to fear and to fight at all costs. And we know that that's not true, but that's the social discourse that still is pervasive. And Additionally, older people are too often homogenized, lumped together. We make generalizations about older people, like someone who's 65 is the same as someone who's 105, never mind the age, but all the different factors and social identities and locations that contribute to our experiences. So rather than attempting to better understand the diversity that exists as we age. So we are all aging. From the day we're born, we're all aging. Again, I loved Jacqueline's discussion about old, right? I think my mission, and Kim and I have talked about this in terms of lots of things we've done over the last few years, it's to change how people think about aging. And I want old not to be a bad word anymore. OLD, Jacqueline said this morning, it's not a problem. Being old is not a problem. It might have challenges, but so does being young. So does being any age. And it's not age that is the problem. It's our environments and the social context that's setting up challenges and barriers to our experiences. So aging can be a really important time of growth, creativity. I was so inspired by the book and your discussions today. Growth, creativity, capability, and contribution. So just super quickly, to do this work, I do that as part of some very exciting, interesting, and very supportive research networks and practice networks of researchers, students, community groups, practitioners working in the field, and most importantly, with older folks themselves of many, many different ages, and we'll come to that in a sec. So the first, and I mentioned this morning, the Engage Center is Concordia's new in the last 5 years Center for Research on Aging. So that's a really interdisciplinary group with 35 researchers from across the university who study age in many, many different contexts. The ACT project, Kim and Constance lead that, and they mentioned that earlier. So that's where some of the connection for me has built around the technology piece. Thirdly, another research center that some of us are a part of is CREGES, which is, I won't butcher the French, but it's a Center for Research and Expertise in Social Gerontology, which is located within the CU Center West, which looks to bridge research and practice in health and community services in that area. And last but not least, a really fun group that I'm a part of is WIN, which is the West End Intergenerational Network. And that's a more newly formed group that is just in the process of becoming a nonprofit organization that supports different individuals, groups, community groups, nonprofit groups, schools who are involved in intergenerational activities and engagements, again, with a probably big overall goal of addressing those issues of ageism. So that's where some of my work has been couched in the last few years. I'll give just a bit of a general overview of those three main intersections of families, leisure, and technology. So for the past 20 years, it's weird for me to say I've been doing anything for 20 years, but here it goes. In those areas, I think what's really important, you have here on the left some of the how I do my work, and on the right some of the what. What are some of the things that we engage in? So I do a lot of primarily qualitative work, have a lot of conversations, interviews, we might say in our research language focus groups, but also kind of connected to what Peter said earlier today was around using stories to share a deeper and get at a deeper understanding of people's perspectives. So I've been lately doing some narrative storytelling research, both analog and digital, as well as using drawings or photographs or different kinds of artistic methods and opportunities to understand people's experiences. And this is certainly important and central in, again, what Kim alluded earlier to in terms of participatory research or participatory action research. And that's a type of research that is important to me. It's not able to do in every project I've been involved with, but that's where instead of folks being participants in the research study that's designed, laid out, I ask you some questions and then I go analyze the data and go off. Participatory work involves people all as co-researchers, and people are involved in all stages of the process, deciding what the topic is we're going to study, deciding how we're going to do that, who's going to participate, participating in the analysis of the data, and then especially important in terms of what we're going to do with that at the end and how are we going to share that. So that's some of the ways that I engage in my work. And then on, I guess your left, I'm left and right mixed up maybe today, sorry. In terms of the what, inclusion has been a really important focus for me. So the discussions today were very near and dear to my heart around being, belonging, and becoming. So that was really striking for me. Thank you for your stories. Around agency, and Naj alluded earlier to some of a bit of the title of the project. Maybe, well, more so now, maybe a little bit less in how this whole project was conceived, but I'll talk a little bit at the end in terms of why it's important to see and engage older people as very active agents in their lives, in society, and in our research. Ageism, I've mentioned. Families has been a lot of my focus. Also social connection, social networks, so families and friends. And then much of that happens through leisure and recreation opportunities. And certainly, not last and least, yes, challenges as we've noted, but really more specifically, what are strengths and opportunities and capabilities, and how can we use those in order to, make the world a better place? That's a big, let's do that. Anyways, so a little bit about some of the background to my work. I've used the term interage here at the top of the slide. Often this you will see referred to as intergenerational, and that's fine. And in my work around families, that makes a lot of sense because we're talking about different generations of people. I think what we're starting to question a little bit is the usage of the term generation can become quite value laden and really try to generalize and homogenize people of a similar age and categorize them, but also the second thought that I didn't write down there. It often is used to sort of pit people against each other, right? You mentioned there's the boomers, and then there's the Gen X and the Gen Y and the millennials and all these things. And when I say those words, they're not often used with really positive connotations, right? So this is just a little bit of why I'm kind of interested in this term more around across ages, not necessarily groups. And so we see here, this is what we know, from my work, but lots from the literature about lots of opportunities for opportunities or benefits. Certainly this kinds of engagement can help to facilitate a sense of belonging, a sense of community, inclusion. Berkeley mentioned earlier, loneliness, right? One of the most frequently found things in the literature is that it enhances positive attitudes and dispels negative stereotypes that people have of people of other ages. It's an opportunity for learning from both generations. We all have things to learn from each other. It can facilitate self-expression. There's lots of really interesting things about stories and things like that. Kind of along the lines of the attitudes and the stereotypes, it helps to foster compassion and competence for people in relating to older folks, but also, again, people across ages. And it draws more attention to and positive attention to intragroup interaction within groups. And in doing that, people spend less time negatively focusing on their health, which is kind of an interesting finding from the literature. So some of the things that in the next few slides I'm going to share, just some of the things that I've learned over various conversations with both older and younger people. Most often in a lot of my work, that has been grandparents and grandchildren, probably most particularly adult grandchildren, which are a bit understudied. When we study grandchildren, we often study really young kids. So that's where a lot of my work is situated. And in particular here, this is where my engagement with family starts to come in, and leisure. This was a study where I asked folks about the leisure time that they spent together with their families and how that influenced their relationships and vice versa. And what we see here is that leisure, which is often a little bit forgotten or a little bit, yes, that's a nice thing to do, but is it really essential to our well-being? I would argue yes. I think the pandemic has helped people be a little more aware of that kind of thing. But leisure is a really meaningful context for the development of family relationships between different generations, the expression of generativity, which I'm going to come to in a little bit, between those generations. So generativity really not just as a stage, it kind of comes out of Erickson's theory of lifespan growth and development as a midlife or slightly older adulthood stage. So not just as a stage, but really around experiences that contribute to our individual and social well-being. And in some of those kinds of experiences, I'm not going to read the quotes. I think you can kind of see them, but you get the gist there about grandparents being a really important place for developing those relationships. Oops, I went backwards by mistake. But back to the generativity stuff, I think what we see here as opportunities for teaching, learning, mentoring, passing on a sense of a family history, leaving a legacy of ourselves. Those are some of at the crux of kind of generativity. And so we see here, this is a quote. The previous slide was a grandfather speaking. This quote is from a granddaughter who talks about how engaging in things together can really help to strengthen your family ties. You learn about yourself, expose you to other things. So these leisure activities or experiences can afford grandparents the context for teaching grandchildren about their family histories, providing a background for sharing important experiences and life lessons. Sometimes that's kind of task-oriented, teaching a new skill. But it's also about family vacations together and learning about people and places that are involved in the different generations' lives. Often we hear about grandparents teaching children the value of $1, financial things, values about social relationships and social norms. And this is where the technology piece comes into play, teaching younger generations about privacy, about decency, about how much of our lives do we really need to put in the public sphere and share with everybody on the planet what I had for breakfast today, right? But also how to engage with other people and building supportive relationships. So yes, there certainly are benefits. and opportunities engaging with folks. And one of, I guess, one of the more well-known concepts within the family theory literature, particularly in the North American context, is this, what they call the norm of non-interference. And this is where grandparents in particular are really expected to be involved, to be engaged, to be ready to do that at the drop of a hat. Be involved, but don't be too involved. Don't be intrusive, don't be meddling, don't be giving me too much advice, you know, those kinds of things. There's lots of tensions around parenting and different parenting styles and those sorts of things. So here what we see is that often the grandparents will use technology as a way to sort of negotiate and navigate that tension. And by using, this was a study around Facebook, by being on Facebook, they were able to see and keep up to date with the daily postings of their children and their grandchildren without having to be a pest. And this is their words, not mine, or a burden, right? Not having to call them and bug them and interrupt their day. Like here, you know, she says, you know, I can put something there. I can see it, I really appreciate it, but they'll say they'll just get back to me whenever it's convenient for them. So this is a bit of a mechanism that we see. And to point out, that is a really North American norm or phenomenon. Some of my colleagues that I've worked with in these projects from European and Eastern European countries are like, looked at me like I had three heads when I said this norm of non-interference. Like, what do you mean? Like, families are supposed to be interfering. That's what they're supposed to do. Like, that's how they're involved, right? So I think that's also important for us to consider and take into account the different kind of global contexts that we're living in. So kind of building on that, again, some of these challenging things is a bit around ambivalence. And it's really important when we talk about ambivalence. Ambivalence doesn't mean I don't want to do something. I'm ambivalent, like, I feel so about that. It's not that at all. It's really about having these simultaneous, coexisting thoughts, feelings, emotions that really aren't reconcilable. So we could call them tensions, right? We all have experiences like this in our lives with things that it's sort of this love-hate relationship, right? We love them, but there's challenges and those sorts of things. So these experiences aren't really an either or a one or the other. It's how do we kind of navigate these tensions? And so we see this related to technology, and they talk about technological ambivalence. And I hear, this is probably a saying I hear almost every time I talk with older people. It's a blessing and a curse, right? There's some amazing things about it. It allows us to stay connected, but oh my gosh, there's all these challenges, right? And the other thing I hear every time is, oh my gosh, stop changing things all the time. Stop with the constant updates in technology, right? I just get it figured out and then they change it. Like they move the call button to the different side of the screen. For what reason, right? It's so challenging sometimes, right? So technology, there's opportunities and challenges. And to build on the conversation that you had, and as Berkeley pointed out earlier, certainly access to and or use of technology can be a positive contributing factor to well-being. But it's not a panacea, right? It's not the solution to all the world's ills, right? It's not experienced the same way by all people. And I think for me, it's important that it's not the technology or the access to the technology, but it's about what we get from it. How does it contribute to our lives? What is meaningful about it for us? And that's the links to the leisure engagement piece. It certainly technology can open opportunities for social connections, gaining knowledge, getting hockey tickets or whatever, figuring out where you're going to go, what's on at the Montreal Museum of Fine Art, what's the cost of the hotel room. But there also are challenges, and this comes from, both these quotes were from grandmothers. She talks about that technology, yeah, it can be pretty handy. They're glad to have the backup cameras and the GPS, and they talk broadly about different kinds of technologies, but sometimes then you get reliant on them, right? I'm as guilty as anybody. Like now when I go to a new place, I just throw the map on. I don't pay attention to where that is to go back. So it is a bit of this love-hate relationship. Just a couple more. I know we're getting late in the day, just a couple more slides here. I think in leisure, in families, and in technologies, we certainly have extremely diverse motivations for engaging in leisure, in relationships, and with technology. And so technology is often grandparents. This is the 4. I shouldn't have looked at my watch. Grandchildren are often a big motivator for older people to try a new type of digital media or technology. Not for everyone. Also having a history of working with technology in your lives or previous use or those sorts of things. But for lots of folks, these new, particularly social media things, are often motivated by staying in touch with families and friends. Extended family. Interestingly, a lot of grandmothers will tell me Facebook is best for them to stay connected to the third cousins that they don't see all the time. They don't want to pick up and call, but then they're kind of in the loop about what's happening in their lives. So, the family connection piece is sometimes a reason or a mechanism for how and why people will try to negotiate and navigate those ambivalences around technology. And this is sort of the last big piece that I alluded to earlier. The agency piece is really essential, and I think it really underpins much of what we've been talking about and my work. I think and older people I've talked with continually share and demonstrate that they are capable, they are engaged, they are important contributors to the health and well-being of us, of our society. And this is where, in terms of technology, you see it's not a blanket acceptance of the use of technology for technology's sake. It's using it in a very intentional, in a very measured way. And again, this is a little bit around teaching other people, right? You don't need to post everything on social media. Some, like Constance says, they're nervous about how much is publicly available for them. Folks I talked to were very careful not to post vacation photos on Facebook because their house would get broken into while they're away. In small towns, everybody knows everybody and you know where you live, right? So the urban-rural issue comes into play as well. So, but again, this is a grandmother telling her son, don't post all that stuff about me, right? That's for me to decide. So just kind of in conclusion, in relation to that, I just kind of want to walk through these in a reasonably quick pace. I think importantly, a more agentic approach to aging allows us to better understand how and why older people make choices about technology. It's not just that they may not know how to or be able to use, they make choices about the ones that they use and how. So they are knowledgeable, they are asset bearing, they're not deficient or needy as they're often portrayed to be. So I think that's a really important piece to bring to the fore. Secondly, as I mentioned, there are different motivations for engagement. Maybe it's the family relationships, maybe it's, as I heard so much this morning, it's to learn, to grow, to contribute. Maybe, and for me, this is a really most important one, maybe it's just to have fun. It's to have enjoyment. This is the leisure piece. Again, we don't tend to place enough emphasis on that. It's a hard kind of intangible thing to measure, having fun, right? But it is important that you have enjoyment and you have meaning in your life, all of us. Despite the negative stereotypes, we do see certainly interest in new technologies, but that people have different learning styles. And older people may be more reflexive and selective in their approaches. Younger people are sort of a trial and error, try everything, see how it goes kind of approach. Fourthly, using technology in later life, like I said, shouldn't necessarily be an objective per se in and of itself. Sometimes technologies don't engage people in meaningful activities, and older people are more selective about the things that they're trying. They're more careful about, well, what value does this add to my life? That's a lesson that I think people could learn a lot from. I sort of switched a little bit the order here. So down to the bullet point about access and exclusion, engagement with technology, as Kim and Constance have pointed out, is undermined by the fact that digital media don't flow evenly within countries, within people of different incomes, people with less formal education, individuals who are or underemployed, foreign or diasporic communities, women, older people. So we need to be attentive to all those different kinds of social locations when we're exploring these topics. And that inclusion involves more than just access. As I mentioned earlier, it involves it's not just about physical access, but inclusion, making communities more accepting of diversity in all different areas: age, gender, class, race, sexual orientation, all sorts of things like that. So lastly, and overall, I think it's time that we need to shift viewing differences and challenge as problematic, and rather embrace the opportunities and strengths that arise when we're open to learning, being exposed to different types of people, different customs, different ways of thinking, different ways of being. So that's the end for me. Sorry, did I squeeze it in enough time? Thank you. Thoughts? Questions?
Thank you, Shannon.
Reflections?
Oh, all right. Yes, I keep skipping your questions. I'm discriminating against you.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Two quick questions or maybe comments. First of all, it seems to me that privacy does not have the same meaning for the younger generation as it has for us or older adults. Often when you talk to a 20-year-old and you ask them, hey, you have 500 friends online and they know everything about you and you know everything about them, their only answer to you is, so what? Right? That's it. So, there is a gap here. There is a misunderstanding, and I don't know how to resolve it, but I can see it very clearly. My second question is that is there any, or are there any numbers as to how in Canada, say, the percentage of the older adults that actually are actively involved and engaged in social media? not only with one person who is the grandson or granddaughter, but to a network, actively searching for a network that is of interest to them and then actually getting involved with that network?
Yeah, it's an excellent question and one that I don't have the answer to. Is it out there? Maybe. It's pretty tough to pin down, right? It's often statistically, like Stats Canada, they measure who has internet access, or I think the question is, have you accessed the internet in the last 7 days? So we don't have good population level stats about it. There's a little bit of stuff here and there from different sort of think tanks, but again, then I get a little bit cautious about who their sample has been because it relates to the politics of their orientation, right? Kim, do you want to jump in? Yeah. Well, just the other piece, just to back to your first comment, there's an interesting quote that I like to share about the privacy piece, because I had a grandmother tell me once, and this is that teaching and role modeling that they do with the younger generation. She's like, all this stuff on Facebook, and she was on Facebook. She was actually an artist and she sold her work that way. So she was quite active, but that was her professional life. And she said, this is just absurd. She said, and I love this metaphor. She said, it would be like me printing out a bunch of 8x10 photos, taping them on the side of my car and driving around town. Like, haha, here's everything you need to know about me, right? I love the metaphor, right? So that's the opportunity, I think, for sort of some of that teaching around those norms. Yeah. Did you want to, Kim, jump back in about that? Thank you. I'm glad that I just didn't.
No, there's no accurate data on social media use. We have done, that's part of the longitudinal survey work that we've done. I have to say it's really expensive to do. So the people who tend to do it are private companies and they don't share data. And for us to do it as researchers, we'd be spending our money hiring Leger, which we've done. And is that where we really want to put all of our dollars all the time?
And often those surveys are done not with very many older people. This study that they have done is really help them to expand beyond the 50 plus group to at least go to age 65. But what about the people who are 95, 105, right?
And older, when we were asking them to do statistical work for us, said they will never answer. We insisted, and they thought, oh my God, look at that, they did.
Well, yeah, and that just to echo in the microphone because Kim didn't have the marketing companies not wanting to do that. Again, there's this reliance on online surveys. So you're already getting a biased sample that way.
I was surprised, maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear anything about the famous grandsons. Because all my friends say, well, the only reason that I'm on the internet is because my grandson showed me how to use it.
Yes, well, and that's a bit of the teaching piece and that bi-directional piece. Thank you. I mean, I didn't get into a lot of detail about it. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of teaching them how to do it. They're sort of the help desk people. Some of them bemoan when the grandson comes over because they change the settings on the computer and then they can't get back on their crossword puzzles or their knitting websites or whatever, those kinds of things. So it goes both ways. So yes, there's a lot of the younger generation teaching about technology, but there's a lot about the older generation teaching as well. So yeah, thanks for raising that. Good. Yeah, tired, rub your eyes, tired. Thanks for hanging in. I'll just sort of wrap up. Naj is going to come back up with the mic, but as I started with some words of thanks this morning, I just want to thank all of you. Certainly, if you have thoughts or ideas, please get in touch with us. It's really important for us to do the work that is important to you and with you and for you. Thanks to everyone for joining us today, both in person and online. And thanks for your interest and involvement in the research and in the study. Thanks to everybody for being involved, Nash and Momo and everybody for coordinating the day. The Force Space gang have been a huge support, so thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This has been great. Thank you, Shannon, for supporting it. Thank you, Kim, for having been an inspiration for a lot of these ways of thinking. So that needs to be acknowledged. Thanks to every one of you for being part of this really amazing project and sort of sticking around with us in such a long day, coming through this snow. It's really amazing, and I think it's all about having fun. I think as this project is going to be living in the cyberspace eternally, those who could not come here, they could always see the recording. For that, I'm incredibly grateful to the Fourth Space team. They always make it look easy for us, and basically that's the big round of applause to those. And yeah, let this conversation continue. I think we have made one book. Maybe we can make other books. So let's think about it. And thank you so much. So I think I should.
Do you want to? If there's, I think there was a bunch of the photo.
Oh, the photo. We haven't taken a photo. So everybody come
Everybody
here.
come up to the front. Also, as you're doing that, there probably was a fair bit of leftover food and drinks and stuff in the fridge. So please go help yourself, take some home. We're really happy for everybody to have that. We don't need to take it all home. We'll donate it to folks who need if we need. So yeah, come up for the photo. I'm going to take the mic off so you stop hearing me. I'm also going to not be in the center of the photo.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today for Click Zooming Through the Lens of Experience, and thank you to all the project leaders and the artists. Thank you to everyone that joined us on Zoom. We are going to go ahead, close up the live stream and close up the Zoom. So thank you again, and it was recorded to YouTube, so you can watch it right away. Thanks so much and have a good day.